Michael had always believed in the strength of his marriage. He and Sarah had been together for nearly 5 years, their love seemingly unshakable, their family picture-perfect. They had a young daughter, Lily, who brought them both immense joy. Life was stable, with routine, work, and quiet evenings spent together. Michael's job kept him busy, often working late, but he had always tried to make time for his wife. Yet lately something had shifted. Sarah seemed different. There was a distance in her eyes, a coldness that wasn't there before. Their conversations, once flowing easily, had started to feel forced. She'd become more distracted, spending hours on her phone, her laughter no longer resonating with the warmth it once had. Michael noticed it, but chose to dismiss it, convincing himself it was just the pressure of life. After all, they had a young child, and life wasn't always easy. But even in their quiet moments together, Michael could sense her withdrawal. At dinner, Sarah would stare into space, as though lost in thought, and when he asked if something was wrong, her responses were always vague. "I'm fine, just tired." She hadn't smiled the way she used to in months. That smile had been the one thing Michael could rely on after a long day at work. There were small changes, too, things he couldn't ignore. Sarah had started going out more frequently, meeting friends for drinks or running errands late at night, leaving Michael to care for Lily. It wasn't unusual for Sarah to have her own time, but the late nights and secrecy were new. When Michael questioned her, she assured him it was nothing. "Just a night out with the girls," she would say. But there was an edge in her voice, a tension that Michael couldn't shake. One evening, Michael came home earlier than expected. He walked into the house, expecting to find Sarah relaxing on the couch with Lily, as they often did after dinner. But instead, the house was eerily quiet. He called out her name, and there was no response. His eyes instinctively scanned the living room, landing on the table where her phone lay, face down. A strange feeling settled in his stomach, a gut instinct that something wasn't right. He walked quietly to their bedroom, where he thought he'd find Sarah, but the door was slightly ajar. As he pushed it open, the sight that met him froze him in place. It wasn't the first time he'd seen her in the bedroom, but it was the first time he realized he didn't recognize the woman standing before him. She looked over her shoulder, startled, as though she had been caught in the middle of something she couldn't explain away. Michael's heart pounded in his chest, the blood draining from his face. Sarah's expression shifted instantly, caught between guilt and denial. Before Michael could speak, Sarah quickly grabbed her clothes, her hands trembling. The man in the room, an unfamiliar face, hurriedly dressed and made his way out without saying a word. The door clicked shut behind him. For a moment, Michael couldn't breathe. He stood there, staring at his wife, who now looked like a stranger. Sarah's eyes welled up, but the tears were not the ones Michael had expected. There was no pleading, no apology. Only guilt, shame, and the faintest sense of defensiveness in her voice. I never meant for this to happen," she whispered, her words breaking through Michael's stunned silence. But it didn't matter. Her admission fell flat in the face of his shock. Michael stood frozen, unable to process what had just unfolded before him. His thoughts were a whirlwind, questions flooding his mind, but nothing seemed to make sense. Was this really happening? Was this the woman he had built a life with? The woman he trusted? For a long time, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt thick, suffocating. Michael wanted to scream, to demand answers, but no words came. He couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't understand why. His world, his family, everything he thought he knew, was shattering in front of him. He was no longer certain of anything, not the love they had shared, not the future they'd built, not even his own place in the life they'd created. And as Sarah's eyes filled with more tears, Michael realized that their marriage, their family, had already begun to unravel, long before he'd caught her in that moment. Michael stood frozen, his mind racing, struggling to process what he had just witnessed. The room felt like it was closing in on him, and his body betrayed him as it trembled with a mixture of anger, confusion, and disbelief. Sarah was standing in front of him now, hands shaking, her face pale, her eyes wide with panic. He could see the guilt written all over her, but it didn't make it any easier to swallow. Michael, I never meant for this to happen, Sarah stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. But Michael could barely hear her. The weight of the moment was too heavy. His thoughts were spinning, tangled in a web of betrayal and heartbreak. For 5 years, he had trusted Sarah completely. She was the woman he married, the mother of his child. He had believed that they were a team, that nothing could tear them apart. But this was a lie he hadn't seen coming. How long? His voice cracked as he spoke, barely able to form the words. Sarah hesitated, her eyes dropping to the floor, her lips trembling. A few months. A few months. The words hung in the air like a punch to the gut. Michael couldn't breathe. His heart clenched, and he took a step back, feeling as though the ground beneath him had suddenly disappeared. His whole body felt numb, and his chest tightened with a mixture of rage and pain. I don't understand, Michael said, his voice shaking.
Why?
Why would you do this? Sarah swallowed hard, her face contorted with emotion. I don't know, Michael. I don't know. I felt alone. I felt like you weren't here anymore. You were always working and she paused, taking a deep breath. I made a mistake. A huge mistake. But I never meant for it to go this far. Michael shook his head, his anger rising now. You don't get it, Sarah. You don't get what you've done to me. To this family. His voice was loud now, his frustration spilling over. He couldn't control the way his emotions were crashing through him, each one more powerful than the last. Every question, every hurt, every memory they had built together now seemed tainted by this betrayal. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she stepped forward, reaching for him, but Michael pulled away, not wanting her touch, not knowing if he could ever in. Michael spent the next few days in a haze, his mind constantly racing. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of Sarah and the other man replayed in his mind, over and over. The betrayal felt like a weight, pressing down on him with every breath he took. He couldn't escape it. He couldn't run from it. And every time he saw Sarah, the anger and the pain swelled inside him, threatening to boil over. Sarah had tried to talk to him repeatedly, but Michael couldn't bring himself to listen. What was there left to say? Every apology felt hollow, every explanation a feeble attempt to justify her actions. He was torn between the man he once was, the one who loved her, and the man she had made him become, the one who was now questioning everything he had known. Finally, after days of avoiding her, Michael couldn't take it any longer. He had to confront her. There was no more running from this truth. If they were to even have a chance at understanding what had happened, he needed to hear it from her. But this conversation was different. This time, he wasn't looking for answers that would ease the pain. He wasn't looking for a way to forgive her. He was looking for the truth, no matter how much it cut. Sarah, he began, his voice low but firm. You need to tell me everything. I need to know exactly what happened. Her face turned pale, her hands shaking as she sat down across from him. She knew this was coming, but the reality of it still seemed to hit her hard. She had been bracing for this conversation, but nothing prepared her for the intensity in Michael's eyes, the coldness in his voice. She took a deep breath, clearly struggling with the weight of what she was about to reveal. I didn't mean for it to get out of hand, Sarah whispered, her eyes avoiding Michael's. I thought I could handle it. I thought it would be just a little fling, just something to fill the void. But it wasn't like that. It got real, and before I knew it, I was in too deep. And I couldn't stop. Michael's chest tightened as her words sunk in. The image of the man, the unknown man who had been in their home, in their life, kept flashing in his mind. How long? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper, though the pain in it was unmistakable. A few months, Sarah repeated, her voice breaking slightly. We've been seeing each other for a while now, but it wasn't about you, Michael. It wasn't about not loving you. It was about me. I was lost. I felt like I wasn't enough for you. Like I was invisible in this marriage. The words cut deep, deeper than he had anticipated. Michael couldn't understand how Sarah, the woman he had married, could look him in the eyes and say that. He had never once made her feel unimportant. He had worked hard for their life, their family. And this was how she repaid him? You felt invisible? Michael's voice cracked as the realization settled in. I work myself to the bone to give you everything. You weren't invisible to me. I thought we were a team, Sarah. I thought we had everything. Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she nodded, unable to meet his gaze. I'm so sorry, Michael. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I could make it stop before it went too far. But it didn't work out that way. How can you expect me to believe that? Michael's anger flared, his emotions spiraling out of control. How can you say you never wanted to hurt me when you've been hiding this from me for months? You lied to my face every single day. How am I supposed to move past this? Sarah reached out, but Michael pulled back. He didn't want her touch. Not now. Not when everything between them had changed in an instant. I don't know if I can forgive you, Michael said, his voice shaking with emotion. I don't know if I want to. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. But I need you to know I'm sorry. I didn't want this to happen. I couldn't stop it. Michael's mind was spinning. He had trusted her. He had given her everything, and now it was all shattered. The foundation they had built their lives on was nothing more than dust. And for what? Because she couldn't handle feeling alone? Because she had made a mistake, one that would destroy their family? He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but it didn't help. He couldn't look at Sarah the same way anymore. She had broken something inside him, something that would never be repaired. I can't do this, Sarah, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I can't keep pretending that everything's okay. We can't just sweep this under the rug and move on. I don't know if I can even stand to be in the same room as you right now. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah sat there, broken, silent. Michael stood up, feeling a deep ache in his chest, as if his heart were being torn in two. He didn't know what the future held anymore, didn't know if there was a way forward for them. As he walked away, he realized something. This wasn't just about Sarah's betrayal. It was about him, too. He had to figure out who he was now. He had to rebuild his life, one step at a time, even if that meant leaving everything he once thought was true behind. Michael spent the next few weeks in a fog, his thoughts a constant whirlpool of confusion, pain, and anger. Every interaction with Sarah felt like an effort, like an emotional weight he couldn't bear. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold and foreign. The silence between them grew heavier with each passing day. He couldn't escape it, no matter where he turned. Sarah tried to talk to him, to apologize, but Michael could barely bring himself to listen. What was there left to say? For the first time in years, Michael found himself questioning everything. What had happened to the love he thought they shared? Had it ever really been there? He thought about their daughter, Lily, and the life they had built together, but it all felt so fragile now. Could he really continue living under the same roof with a woman who had shattered his trust? Could he go on pretending that nothing had changed? He knew he had to make a decision, but every option felt impossible. On one hand, there was the life they had shared, the years of love, the family they had built. Could he throw that all away? Was there a chance to rebuild what had been broken, to salvage something from the wreckage? On the other hand, there was the deep sense of betrayal that gnawed at him every time he looked at Sarah. Could he ever forgive her? Could he truly move past what she had done? The days stretched on, and with each passing moment, Michael felt the weight of indecision pressing down on him. He had tried to ignore it, to push it aside, but the truth was inescapable. He was broken. And as much as Sarah begged for a second chance, he couldn't ignore the fact that the foundation of their marriage had been irreparably damaged. It wasn't just the affair. It was the way she had hidden it from him, the way she had lied to his face every time he asked if something was wrong, the way she had let him believe everything was fine while she was living a double life. That was the part he couldn't get over. The deceit, the betrayal of everything they had built. One evening, as the sun set and the house grew quieter, Michael sat down with Sarah for what he knew would be their final conversation. She had been asking for it, pleading for the chance to make things right, but deep down he knew there was no going back. The cracks were too deep, the damage too severe.